Howdy there, Isaac here. This is one of my longest what ifs, and while it isn't quite at an end, this will act as a season finale until the anime and manga progress a little. I'll probably re-record or rewrite the earlier episodes and put it all together into a movie soon. Anyways, without further ado, let's see what may have happened if Izuku was a Uchiha. Story starts now. Tokoyami took a step closer to Izuku, asking him what had happened, while Bakugo simply gritted his teeth, staring at the Uchiha with an intensity unlike any other. It doesn't really matter, does it? Now Bakugo, come with us and nobody gets hurt. If not, well, you already know. Izuku glanced over towards the other villains who already broke out of their respective restraints.
Like hell I will. I'm going to kick some sense into your ass, you damn nerd.
Bakugo charged at Izuku, shooting off a huge explosion before the two made contact, sending the Uchiha into a nearby tree. Tokoyami tried to make Bakugo stop, but the blonde shrugged him off, saying the time for words was over, especially after what he did to Aizawa. Tokoyami looked over towards their sensei, who was laying passed out on the ground, before promising to capture Izuku, if only to question why he'd become a villain. Izuku recovered from the explosion, putting his mask back on before pulling out a saber, rushing towards Bakugo with surprising speed. The bombastic blonde was only able to dodge with the use of his explosions, but Izuku anticipated this and threw a couple knives into the air. They were about to hit Bakugo, but Dark Shadow flew in and blocked them. The Uchiha then threw a couple knives at Tokoyami, who just barely avoided them, getting a pretty decent gash on his cheek, much to Dark Shadow's frustration. Bakugo and Dark Shadow charged Izuku as fast as they could, the demon grabbing onto his legs, while the blonde aimed his hand right at the spiral mask.
Take that damn thing off and look me in the eyes, Deku!
Bakugo released a huge explosion, one which nearly shook the forest, sending his mask flying off into the distance. The Uchiha had been blown onto the ground, his face slightly singed and hair lit at the ends, but he managed to sit up and compose himself, looking Bakugo in the eyes. The person you knew is dead. The name I go by now is Shinku. Now, if that's all you got, this won't be so tough. This caused Bakugo to growl before preparing to charge his rival once more. But before that, a cry rang out from behind him. Bakugo glanced over to see Shoji reeling back after having one of his doubly arms compressed by a villain. Besides that, none of the heroes were doing well. Luckily, that one muscular guy was just standing still, otherwise they'd be dead. Shinku looked over towards Shinzo, who was shakily standing next to Muscular, then ordering him to charge the Uchiha. How foolish of you, sending him towards the one person who knows your weaknesses. Shinku grabbed a knife and prepared to throw it, before Tokoyami appeared behind him, Dark Shadow using his body to bind him down.
And how foolish of you, thinking we wouldn't be able to beat you.
Dark Shadow squeezed around the Uchiha before slamming him into the ground and moving away. Before he could get up, the brainwashed Muscular came in and slammed a fist into his back. Shinzo, Bakugo, and Tokoyami watched as Muscular beat the Uchiha into the dirt, wailing on him with no remorse or mercy. Tokoyami thought they may be going overboard, but Shinzo didn't. After seeing what he did to Aizawa, and especially after what he did to Shinzo himself, this didn't seem so bad. They let it go for a while longer before Tokoyami said to stop. Shinzo didn't want to, but after seeing Tiger get cut a couple times by Moonfish, it was apparent they needed to use their quirks on other people. The brainwashed Muscular charged towards Moonfish while Tokoyami inspected Shinku. The Uchiha was beaten and bloodied on the floor, though he didn't look too bad. He turned around to tell the others,
We got him, guys. He's...
But the Birdman was interrupted by Dark Shadow, telling him to look out. I'm what? Knocked out? Perhaps even dead? Tokoyami felt a piercing pain in his gut, grabbing the now crimson blade and only thinking of one thing.
Why, Izuku?
Because you were my best friend. Dark Shadow screamed out, transforming into a monstrous beast, but Shinku looked up and cast a powerful genjutsu on the beast, paralyzing and sending it recoiling. The Uchiha pulled his saber from Tokoyami, catching and holding the teen in his arms.
You make no sense, Izuku Uchiha.
Tokoyami said as he was laid onto the ground. "Neither does this world, but I assure you, it will be a better one after this. You will be avenged, Tokoyami." With that, Shinku left his best friend there, bleeding out without any hope of being saved. Tokoyami couldn't be sure, but he thought he saw a tear in the villain's eyes. Perhaps he really was his best friend. Tokoyami closed his eyes and laid his head back. He hoped the Uchiha was right. Hopefully, this world would be a better one. Hopefully, from here, no one would ever have to die.
Deku!
Bakugo yelled out, charging in and landing a heavy right hook on the Uchiha's face. Izuku nearly fell, but the blonde caught him by the collar and delivered another punch. Bakugo held Shinku there while hitting and kicking him. There were no explosions, no over-the-top fighting, no yelling, just a fight. Shinku allowed himself to be hit a couple times before sweeping Bakugo's leg, grabbing his throat, and slamming him into the ground. The blonde grabbed onto Shinku's arm and wrapped his legs around it, leaning forward, nearly breaking it at the elbow. But the villain wouldn't let that happen. He slammed his fist into the hero's face over and over, causing him to loosen his grip, which Shinku took as his chance to slip out of the lock. The two shakily stood and squared back up, with the blonde being the first to move. He stumbled forth, going to hit Izuku, who easily stepped back to avoid it, only for the blonde to suddenly lurch forward, grab his opponent's arms, and drive a knee into his chest. Shinku was surprised at the fight Bakugo still had in him, but expected nothing less. The Uchiha grit his teeth and headbutt his opponent, causing the two to separate. Izuku looked towards Bakugo. He had certainly grown since the sports festival, but it still wouldn't be enough. Shinku had taken quite a bit of damage against Bakugo, and especially muscular. And after Tokoyami, he thought he'd feel more powerful than ever, but for some reason, he just felt weaker. He couldn't be focused on that right now. He had to defeat and capture Bakugo. The two went at each other again, but this time Bakugo utilizes explosions, using small ones to keep Shinku from grappling with him, only for the Uchiha to use his knives. Most of his blades missed, but one managed to hit Bakugo in his leg, setting him back onto the ground. This was the point where Mr. Compress snuck up on the blonde and used his quirk to capture him. The Uchiha sighed and looked over at Compress, saying he could have got himself, but the charismatic villain simply pointed towards everyone else who had defeated their opponents. Shoto was badly burned. Ida was laying on the floor, bleeding from a slash near his ribs. Tiger was, well, it's best to not be described, while Shoji and Shinzo were nowhere to be seen. Izuku nodded, while Dabi called the other villains to their location, but only Toga and the Chainsaw Nomu would arrive. Dabi, not caring about his comrades, left without Mustard, Spinner, or Magni. The following day was filled with a PR nightmare for UA. Of course, everyone wanted to keep it under wraps that a student had become a villain, but somehow it was leaked, and this caused the school to close down. It wasn't closed forever, but they thought a small week-long vacation would be good. Meanwhile, there was a public outrage at Aizawa, allowing a student to die and villains to injure other students once again. Other than Tokoyami, Shoji had one of his arms removed, not just a dupli, but, one of his actual arms. Shinzo also had extensive wounds, being in a coma due to blunt force trauma from muscular, though he was expected to make a full recovery. Ida had also been put into a coma after needing surgery to save his life. The last of the students to be injured was Shoto, who had the least severe injuries. He had burns all over him, but they were all first degree. Maybe a couple second degree burns here and there, but Dabi had taken him out of the fight by beating him, not burning him. Within 24 hours, Shinzo had awoken, with Todoroki being released along with a solemn Shoji. Everyone except Shinzo had lost hope of being even able to keep going. The path of the hero seemed lost, and the students spent most of their time within their rooms at UA, except for Shinzo. He didn't know Izuku very well, or anyone for that matter, but he knew something had to be done. And so, Shinzo went around the dorms, knocking on everyone's door and telling them to meet in the common room. Everyone eventually made it there, but they all looked worse for wear. Ida was still in the hospital, Shoji was seriously looking at a career change, and worst of all, the room would be missing one person. Permanently.
Guys, we can't just do nothing. We need to save Bakugo. Is there anything you guys have come up with?
The room stayed silent, the various students all looking dejected at the thought of doing anything heroic.
Come on! We're heroes, aren't we? Bakugo's probably being beaten by Izuku. We need to do something. Anything!
You don't get it. Each of those villains were stronger than even the strongest of us.
What can we do?
Let's just leave it up to the heroes. They'll handle this better than we could, Todoroki said before walking off to his dorm.
What about Izuku? He was one of you, right? Don't you want to ask him why he did what he did?
The room went silent again before Shoto responded.
He did it because he's power hungry. I saw him after he beat Stain at my father's agency. He's just like him. All that matters is power to those people, even if it means betraying your friends. Forget about Izuku and Bakugo. They'll be taken care of by the heroes.
With that, everyone went to their rooms, leaving Shinzo behind, frustrated at this lack of spirit. Back at the villain's hideout, everyone was in pretty good spirits, with Muscular and Moonfish eager to go on another mission and fight more people. Shinku is getting patched up by Nurse Kurogiri, while Shigaraki, tries to recruit Bakugo. The blonde once again attacks Shiggy, but this time he calls on Shinku. The Uchiha stands up and looks towards Bakugo. The two lock eyes for a second before the hero hopeful falls into a genjutsu. Compress catches him, using his quirk to capture the blonde.
We'll get him to join our side one way or another. But with the police on our tails, we need to get out of here.
Just then, a knock is heard on the door. Pizza time, pizza! Endeavor suddenly bursts through a wall, with Kamui Woods flying in to capture the villains. Shinku looks to the various heroes coming in and puts Gran Torino and Edshaw under genjutsu. This allows Dabi to burn the wood, while Moonfish and Muscular break out using their quirks. Tomura orders Kurogiri to warp in the Nomu, and he does so without a problem. Suddenly, several Nomu appear outside the building, while Endeavor and Muscular begin fighting. Moonfish also makes his move, aiming his teeth at the unconscious Edshot. Dabi uses his flames to support Muscular, while Compress checks on Shinku, who had fallen to the floor and was holding his eyes. The Uchiha says he's fine, just used a powerful genjutsu on those two. Compress tells him to use it once more on Endeavor, but Shinku says it would cost him too much. He'd be unable to use his quirk after that. The two then hear a mysterious man yell out, "Power!" Shinku recognizes his voice then, and looks up to see Mirio Togata knocking a Nomu out, and realizes, yeah, this isn't good. Even with his Sharingan, Mirio is fast, and with just one punch he was able to take out a Nomu. Muscular was able to knock Endeavor onto the ground, and was about to finish him, but Mirio burst in and punched him into the back wall of the bar. He then zoomed over and delivered a mighty punch to Kurogiri, knocking the mist monster out. All this happened so fast that everyone besides Shinku had whiplash. Mirio then zoomed over and punched Compress in the stomach, hitting him so hard that Bakugo's marble came loose and fell onto the floor. Both Mirio and Shinku notice this and reach for the marble, with the hero getting it a split second before the Uchiha. Mirio squeezed the marble and freed Bakugo, but before anything else could happen, black liquid appeared around the villains and Bakugo, warping them all away. The villains appear at a warehouse where several heroes are laying on the ground. There, surrounded by Tori, Bat, and a new Nomu who had 4 arms, each holding a blade dripping with blood, is the ringleader. All for One tells Shigaraki to keep trying his best, and to keep his allies close. Shinku feels All for One almost look at him, as if warning Shigaraki about him specifically, or something like that. This presence, it was terrifying, but the Uchiha had felt one like this before, like his father's. This time, Mirio arrives and has to fight All for One, who is definitely struggling to keep him away from the other villains, but is able to stalemate the hero. Gran Torino then arrives, but Muscular is able to hold him off, unable to hit the old man, but able to keep up with him. Shigaraki, of course, wants to help his master, but All for One tells him to leave. Shinku is looking around the battlefield, seeing the carnage and chaos that's unfolding, especially once Endeavor gets onto the scene. All the villains are scrapping against the heroes, except for Shigaraki, who's busy watching his master fighting against Mirio. Shinku pulls out his saber and begins walking toward Shigaraki, but a sudden yell stops him.
"Deku! Come back here and fight me!"
Shinku turns around to see Bakugo, standing in front of a recently blown up Toga and Twice. "I told you, stop calling me that. Stand down. One look and you'd end up just like Tokuyami." Shinku's crimson eyes meet Bakugo's.
Do it, you damn traitor. It's the only way you would be able to beat me anyways.
Shinku's hands balled into fists. He knew Bakugo wouldn't let him go, that this was a battle that had to be fought. The Uchiha sighed and pointed his saber towards Bakugo. Then fight me, Katsuki Bakugo. The two charged at each other, with Bakugo aiming both hands towards Shinku's spiral mask. But surprisingly, the Uchiha managed to kick both his arms away, redirecting the blast into the air. Bakugo quickly flipped in the air, avoiding another kick from his opponent and aiming a hand behind him. The bombastic blonde shot a huge explosion, which propelled him into the nerd, using his free hand to grab the mask and launch a series of small explosions in quick succession. Shinku was forced onto the ground, where Bakugo launched one final explosion, shattering the mask and revealing the gaze of the Uchiha. He didn't look hateful or spiteful at all, but his eyes were as intense as ever. They were those same eyes Bakugo always hated, ones far closer to All Might's than his own. Bakugo went to launch another explosion, but Shinku punched him in the face, his fist feeling like a ton of bricks. The blonde staggered back, but before he could recover, Shinku had run up and kicked him into the air, grabbed his leg, then slammed him back into the ground. Bakugo was utterly shocked at this new power. If Deku was this powerful back at the forest, why didn't he show it? Why didn't he just finish the blonde as easily as he did Tokoyami? Even worse than that, he could tell the damn nerd was still holding back. He hadn't used blades this entire fight, or genjutsu. The hero hopeful recovered, leaning up and launching a huge explosion right in Shinku's face, sending him skidding back a couple meters, while debris flew into several Nomu who were fighting other heroes.
You always looked down on me, didn't you, Deku?
Bakugo said, shakily standing up as fire and shockwaves covered the nearby battlefield.
I looked down on your savagery. You were always screaming and yelling about how good you were, how nobody could stand up to you. Until I got my quirk, of course. Yeah, you were always so strong, always beating me, but you never went all out. Why, huh? Why didn't you fight me with everything you got? Why didn't you kill me in that forest? Tell me the real reason.
Shinku was silent for a moment before looking to his saber.
You weren't worth my time.
Sparks went off in Bakugo's hand.
I thought you were like All Might, Deku. I looked up to you, you damn traitor. I was always so weak. Back at USJ, if I had been strong enough, fast enough, he'd still be here. He'd defeat these villains and take your ass back to UA.
Shinku's eyes widened a bit. Did Bakugo want him back at the school? No, that was stupid. He was a monster now. He didn't belong at UA, or anywhere for that matter. He had to finish this mission now. He didn't have time to keep talking with Bakugo.
But if he isn't here, I'll just have to do it. You hear that? I'm going to kick your ass, Deku. If you won't be like him, I will.
Shinku held his saber tight as Bakugo raced towards him. The blonde went to swipe with his right hand, but Shinku could read his movements, and knew this was a feint. If Bakugo wanted him to go all out, then he would. Just this once. When the blonde went to use his left hand instead, Shinku drove his saber through his shoulder. Bakugo grunted in pain and went to use his other hand, but Shinku grabbed his forearm and kneed the elbow, a loud crack sounding off. The blonde staggered back, but Shinku didn't let up. He grabbed his collar, pulling him in before delivering a knee to his stomach. Bakugo doubled over before Shinku grabbed him by the waist and suplexed him into the ground, the hard concrete cracking and splintering from the force. The blonde was seeing stars. He knew he had a concussion at the very least, and now neither of his arms were working. At this point, he was nothing but useless. He then watched as Shinku pulled his saber from his shoulder and began walking off.
Where are you going? Finish me! Come back here and finish this fight, you coward! It can't just end like this!
Shinku looked back at Bakugo, who was sobbing now, clearly trying to use his arms, but they just wouldn't move.
Like I said, You're not worth my time. Oh, but you're worth ours.
The Uchiha watches as Shinzo and Kirishima rush to Bakugo's aid. Shinzo was eyeing Shinku with a deadly stare, one which was slightly overshadowed by the bruises and cuts all over his face. In a way, he was similar to the Uchiha now, but those wounds would heal, unlike the scars.
Uchiha Izuku, we're here to capture you. What you did at the forest camp won't go unpunished.
Shinzo threw his scarf towards the Uchiha, who simply grabbed and held onto it. Shinzo attempted to pull the scarf away, but it wouldn't budge.
What are you doing, man? Let's just get Bakugo and leave,
Kirishima said, carefully lifting the blonde up onto his back.
No, we need to capture him,
Shinzo yelled out, his eyes filled with vengeance and hatred, something Shinku recognized. The Uchiha burst over toward Shinzo, him being so fast the student thought he practically teleported. A fist sank into the brainwashed hero's stomach, sending him to his knees in one fell swoop.
Give up, Shinzo.
The student looked up at Shinku. He looked even more erratic and angry and went to pull something out from his pocket. The student then suddenly went to stab Shinku, and to his surprise, hit his mark. His blade slid between Shinku's ribs, a grunt emanating from the Uchiha as he grabbed onto Shinzo's forearm and looked into his eyes.
There, you've got your petty revenge. Now you can stop. If you keep going down this route of violence and retaliation, it will cost you everything. Even those close, like your mother and best friend.
Before Shinzo could ask why the Uchiha wasn't beating him down, or why he let himself get stabbed, he was knocked out. The Uchiha then looked to Kirishima.
Kirishima, make sure these two get to a safe place. I leave it to you,
Shinku said, pulling the knife out of his ribs and walking off toward Shigaraki. On his way there, the Uchiha saw that flames were dancing around the nearby buildings, while screams and cries echoed across the battlefield like some sort of wretched chorus. This was what he was fighting to stop, fighting to keep from spreading across the nation. War only begets war, but all Shinku could do was fight right now. Hopefully after today, this would all be over. At least for now. Shigaraki was on a nearby mound of rubble, shaking Kurogiri, trying desperately to wake him up.
Shinku, help me wake Kurogiri. Master will need his help to beat that Mirio guy. If we can just beat him, then we'll win this thing, and be able to destroy this
Shigaraki then felt the cold steel of Shinku's blade pierce his chest, a pain he never thought he'd have to endure.
What did you just...
Shigaraki grabbed the blade, decaying it and crying out for his master, though it was cut short when a knife was driven through his neck. The villain fell to the ground, writhing in pain, while Shinku simply watched.
I feel sorry for you. You were nothing but a child who never got over his petty lust for destruction. But I'm no better. Would you like to know a secret? I hate you for taking my life away at USJ. That's when this all started. You decided to look into my life after that and my victory over Stain. And you sent Nomu after my home, thinking I'd be there that week.
Shigaraki was now struggling to breathe, but this statement got his attention for a split second, his eyes meeting with the Uchiha's.
That's right. Did you really think nobody would notice, or put the pieces of the puzzle together? No, you just thought you were above everyone else. Well, let me show you that you're not. Permanently.
Shinku then cast the most powerful genjutsu he possibly could, wherein Shigaraki relived his downfall over and over with no master or Kurogiri to save him. However, Shinku couldn't keep it up for too long, and when it ended, the Uchiha took the last blade he had and ended the villain without a second thought. He looked back to see that many of the heroes were on death's door, but had managed to defeat the villains. All for One had gotten a rage boost after seeing Tomura off, but it wasn't enough to overtake Mirio. However, before the hero could defeat him, that same black liquid surrounded the villain and teleported him away from the battlefield. Shinku sat down, leaning up against some rubble and relaxing for the first time in forever. In fact, this was the first time his Sharingan had been deactivated in a while, perhaps even since he lost his mother. He watched as Mirio lamented his inability to take out All for One, then coming to the realization that Gran Torino had perished against one of the Nomu. Soon, several heroes were wailing about the fact their comrades, no, their family, had fallen to the villains. It was a cacophony of sorrow, and in that, Shinku couldn't help but join in. Tears streamed down the boy's face, and somehow he was also laughing. He wanted to say that everything was over, but he knew it wasn't. Either way though, it was no longer Shinku's problem. He looked down to his ribs, and the blood that had pooled next to him, and knew not much could be done, nor did he want it to be. The Uchiha watched the heroes compose themselves and begin helping those who needed it. As his vision became blurry, Shinku hoped the heroes would do what needed to be done and fix this society. Maybe they could do what he couldn't. Maybe he was wrong in his approach to fighting the villains. But he did the best he could. Hopefully Tokuyami would understand once they met on the other side. Several months later, Kirishima, Shoji, Todoroki, and Bakugo were all at Tokuyami's grave, paying their respects. The four hadn't seen each other in quite some time, but promised to come here once a month at least, and so we're here. Shoji had opted out of the hero course, out of UA entirely, while the other three were still in the hero course, but due to rising tensions, the school never opened back up, and the students were sent back home. These days, the streets were dangerous to walk around, and nobody had their license, so travel was often prohibited. But today was special. They needed to make time for their friend, to remind themselves of what happens when you aren't able to save someone. Suddenly, someone came up from behind them, this being Shinzo, who simply walked in, left a few flowers, and walked off. Bakugo eyed him up, thinking it disrespectful not to at least light some incense, but before he could say anything, Shoji stopped him. He comes here every day. Whatever you have to say, I'm sure he's thought about it every single day. Fine. We should probably go too, before that stupid curfew starts. The 4 teens then began to walk off, right as an older gentleman with jet black hair walked in. He, too, laid flowers down on Tokuyami's grave. Bakugo eyed him. There was something familiar but different at the same time. The man then looked over towards Bakugo, his red eyes shining through the sunglasses he wore. The blonde froze. Was this Izuku? Was he back to finish what he started? Should he warn the others? Bakugo was about to tell Todoroki, but then he noticed the man was too tall to be Izuku, and didn't have scars like he did. Who was this? No, it didn't matter. Curfew would start soon. Bakugo needed to make sure his friends got home safely. The 4 walked out of the cemetery, making their way home as the sun began to set, leaving everything behind, hopefully to see a better day. But that's where this season finale comes to an end. I appreciate it if you guys got this far into the video, and if you enjoyed this series, I'd super appreciate it if you cast a genjutsu on that like button, or maybe even double cross that subscribe button. This series isn't permanently over, but it is over for now. I know half of my subscribers don't watch My Hero Academia videos, but I'm still happy that those who got this far helped me get to 300 subs, and I hope we can keep going. Road to 500 now. I appreciate those who have kept up and wanted this series to continue, and hopefully you guys can find other series you'll enjoy. I'll be honest, this was really tough. Saying goodbye to a character, even if it's only for a bit, it's crazy. I've never ended a series properly, and I've never ended one that was so close. God, if I had to end the Cell series, that would just be bonkers. Anyways, I'll stop rambling for now. You guys have a good day or night, wherever you are. That's it for now. Bye-bye.